How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Okay. It's been a busy day.
Thanks, y'all, for joining today for episode 14. We've been having such good conversations with y'all and with each other about just our healing journeys. And that's what I think has been neat with the podcast is these conversations are just having us go a little bit deeper, and they're helping guide our next episodes, really. Mm-hmm. And so we're still sticking to our 5 pillars. However, there's more of this organic thing happening where based on an episode, it just provokes all these other ideas. Yeah. So from that, we wanted to talk about the power of language today. And we had a pretty cool conversation about triggers. And that was something that came up on our last episode around the concept of triggering. We're going to go into that and explore the topic of just language and how it's important to be mindful of what we say about ourselves, what we say about our stories, and how we're healing, and how that can really dictate that journey and how we move forward. So let's go. Let's jump in.
Where did that word come from? Why is it used so much in our culture and in our society?
Yeah, it is fascinating to think about what key phrases or words really just kind of take hold and get tossed around left and right. And this is definitely one of them. And I think, too, a lot of people are looking into their crap, and so this word, for us, this kind of sparks some curiosity of like, okay, where did this word come from, and how has it evolved to where it is something that we say more frequently?
Yeah.
And a lot of different reasons. Okay, so a trigger, let's get into the definition of that. And
well, maybe it's not even just the word trigger. That's the trigger word in the discussion, but it's really just about the impact of language in general, and the kind of words we use, body, mind, and spirit. The words that we use, do they mean what we think they mean? Mm-hmm. Are we just throwing words around that we heard that we don't really understand?
Mm-hmm. Well, so we were reading an article about just the evolution of the word trigger and where that came from, and it was mainly rooted in the psychology world. Mm-hmm. It was this article was talking about how with a lot of clients with PTSD, especially in the Vietnam era, that word trigger was kind of coined around that time. I'm sure it was used before and all of that, but it was really starting to be used then, which was a real, it was like a medical term.
Yeah, it was a psychological or clinical word that was used to focus on traumatic events or, some sort of emotional or psychological event that you have some sort of response to. Mm-hmm. And for me, it almost always seems like a negative thing. Mm-hmm. That triggered me almost never comes across as a positive response.
Like, are you saying that there's something on the other side of that versus it being a negative thing? Like, it can be a positive thing?
Well, when have you ever heard anybody say, that triggered me and I was happy? Right. I've never heard that. So maybe we have a friend named Jerry who's a clinical psychologist. We could ask him.
I mean, I use it. I mean, it's a hype word too. Like it went from being used in this kind of clinical setting to it becomes more, it's just more a part of everyday language.
It can also become an excuse. I mean.
What do you mean?
That triggered me, so I don't really want to deal with that. Mm. Oh, that triggers me. Oh, I can't go there. That triggers me. I can't go have a hard conversation because it triggers me. And I'm being a little bit pointed there, but sometimes we use those words as ways to deflect or avoid dealing with our stuff.
And yeah, and I think there's a time and place to use the phrase, right? And where it's shedding light on what is actually going on with you.
Yeah. Well, a good thing about it is it has broadened the acceptance of our mental health issues.
That's true.
And it's made people more aware of it. So in that way, it's been good.
When we say I'm triggered, it doesn't really tell the other person what you're feeling. Like it's not really an emotion. It's a response, right? Or it's like a reaction to something. So there's not a lot of clarity in it. You have to be willing to go into, it can't just be like I'm triggered, period. Like you said, where then you don't talk about it.
So we talk about triggering, but, and we don't just want to stay on the word trigger. There are other words that can be used, which was your point. Yeah.
Well, real quick, let's paint that visual, because I think that's also an important. Dad, come on. Okay. This is an important part.
Go ahead. I'm just kidding.
So, because I'm a visual person, and so.
And. Okay, so paint another picture.
Okay, so with the word trigger, the image I have is obviously of a gun, and you can look at it from a lot of different ways, but oftentimes it's the people outside of you and the whole world, they basically are the finger, and they're the finger that pulls the trigger, and we're the trigger. So when I think of it in that kind of context, it feels like I'm giving my power away to somebody else. And that doesn't feel good. It feels a little unsettling in the sense of like, I'm just this passive, stagnant.
What's an example of that?
I mean, if I'm just, if it's the image of you just walk into a room and anybody can pull the trigger on you at any point, you don't have any control. So if I'm getting triggered by all these people, which can happen, and that's a real thing, we have to learn though how do we regain our power in that and not put the onus or the responsibility on someone else having to control the trigger. Does that make sense?
When it happens, how do you write it? And then when I say write, it's in terms of a ship's ballast in a storm. Mm-hmm. It will right itself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So other influences can come in and mess up your balance, creating tools, a mindset, outlook, perspective, whatever word you want to use that helps you write that. Mm-hmm. Because you can't necessarily control the stimulus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Well, and I think that's where it's important then to have the distinction of like, is this a trigger in the sense that I'm responding because I have PTSD about something, or is this a trigger because I'm offended right now by what someone's saying? Like, I think it's again, there is power in words. So when we're using the word trigger, can we get clear with ourselves? And I'm saying that to me, like, can I get clear with myself? Like, is this an actual trigger from my trauma? Or is this a trigger in the sense that my emotions are kind of going out of whack and I need to, because someone said something that is offensive or whatever. Do you know what I mean?
I think so. I think I do.
I'm just saying that it's important. Like, I think when we're talking about what we're talking about with this whole concept of the gun, it's like that makes sense when I'm talking to my therapist about my trauma and I'm getting triggered versus when I'm just out and about and someone says something and I'm offended. Am I offended or am I triggered? Which one is it?
Well,
know what I
maybe
mean?
they're the same.
I think it's different though.
Okay, so how?
I think what we were talking about in the beginning of it being a medical term used in psychology when you're actually talking about post-traumatic stress disorder versus someone said something I didn't like and I'm triggered. Like that to me is different.
Well, we have a lot of young people or people coming back from, armed conflict, wars, who saw atrocities and saw trauma and drama and violence. And they come home and everything goes back to normal. But they actually do get triggered by noises and sounds and
That's true.
smells and things like that. I don't know how does that relate to being offended, or does it? Those kind of, like after mom's cardiac arrest, the panic attacks I'm talking about, the things that would trigger me were, I never knew exactly what it was, but I could feel it coming. But it was random, it felt, but something would cause me to have those panic attacks. Feeling out of control, feeling like I didn't have a way out of situations. And it was reflected back on the night that mom had her cardiac arrest when I watched her basically die in front of me. So I don't know. I don't know if we're on the right track with that or not.
Well, yeah. I think what I'm trying to say is that word can have a lot of meanings.
Yes.
And how do we get clear with ourselves of what do we mean when we say we're being triggered?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And
You might not know what exactly is causing the trigger, but are you just angry? Are you offended, or are you actually triggered?
And and does a person always have the capacity to know that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you have to, I think, that's where you have to be curious to, enough to go into it.
Or, some people who've been on anti-anxiety medications, some of those drugs create or exacerbate the whole idea of triggering, and they make it worse. We have family friends who have been through that and been on those drugs for years, and it's actually worse.
Or, weren't you on? Didn't you try some
I
of
did
this?
for a little while, but the thing that helped me the most was talking about it. My doctor said, I can drug you, or I can set you up to where you can talk about this, and you need to talk about it. So I didn't have actual therapy, which I probably should have had, but every chance I got, I told that story. And I'm an external processor anyway, so I didn't really hold a lot of that in. And it helped. I stopped having those panic attacks after about 2 years, but they were awful.
Yeah.
So I get the idea of being triggered.
Yeah, me too. I went through a pretty traumatic event in college, and I'm not going to get into the details, but it, was sexual trauma. And so there were times where something would happen and I would freeze and couldn't do anything, so I get that too. I get that.
Well, yeah, and those things, some of that I've walked, your mother and I walked with you through some of that, but some of it, I think a key thing to remember with triggers and the result of triggers is sometimes it's not an instantaneous fix around that. Sometimes it just takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
So we were talking about, okay, so we're using that word trigger. What's some other language that you could use around these traumatic or dramatic events?
Well, so when we were discussing this, you and I both sort of, I don't know who said it, but it was this concept of striking a chord versus being triggered. So for me, when I think of something striking a chord, I think of an instrument. I visualize a guitar. I'm looking at one right now, and the strings vibrating and the different sounds that, you know, they create, and how that sound and frequency goes out into the ethers, you know. I just had an image in my mind of throwing a rock into water and seeing the ripple and that go out. And so just to me, it's like this softer approach and this more harmonious, melodic way of like, it's this more like melodic and harmonious way of going down the path of like, okay, why am I being triggered, or why is this striking a chord?
Well, and you may not be able to start there, because when I think of a trigger, and you talked about a gun, it's a one-way thing. You pull the trigger, the bullet goes out, it doesn't come back. Mm-hmm. It's very linear. Mm-hmm. With striking a chord, there's resonance, there's dissonance, there's rest. Mm-hmm. You know, there's all kinds of musical terms you could throw on that. But another one would be as things work in concert. When you use that kind of language, or you can get to using that language, maybe it helps us discern and dial in on what it is actually that is causing the resonance or the dissonance. Because sometimes those triggers, quote unquote, can actually be good things. When you use that different kind of language, sometimes it brings a little more clarity, it seems.
Which language?
That really resonated with me. That really caused me that threw me off. Whatever you said threw me off. It's causing dissonance. Or I know I want to do this in my life, but I'm doing this, and I've got dissonance about that. Mm-hmm. Instead of, I got triggered and now I no longer can do what I wanted to do, or I don't have any options. Mm-hmm. And maybe we're obviously looking at it from our perspective.
Right.
So
right.
Other people would obviously have different opinions and ideas about it.
Yeah, and I think really, again, it's not about don't use this word or use this. I think it's about, you know, when I think of my own healing journey, a lot of what I started to become aware of was my view on of whatever it is I was in the process of healing, and how I spoke about that, how I spoke about my past, how I spoke about y'all, and how you raised me. You know, these stories that I would tell about myself. And that came up a lot in therapy. I think therapy really helped me to start to gain awareness of my word choices.
Yeah.
And really, really start to pay attention to, again, your words are, you know, language is a window into a whole world of just how you're viewing something, you know, and it can limit us, or it can propel us.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't have the words to articulate what you're feeling.
So something that my therapist and I would work on was the language I used about myself. Mm-hmm. So like, I'm messed up, I'm broken, you know, I suck, all the things that I was feeding, you know, the negativity. But instead of saying like I'm broken and I'm messed up, was like, I'm in the process of healing. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm working on this, you know.
So shifting from limiting beliefs and words to words that empowered you and were hopeful and gave you kind of a runway for healing. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, this actually, my friend brought this up recently of, you know, we often say like, we're fixing the broken versus healing the wounded. Like, if we approached it from the latter of healing the wounded, that to me, that evokes more compassion for myself and for whomever else might be in that space of being wounded. You know, I think of a wounded animal. And we touched on that, I think, was it last episode where we were talking about what's wrong with you versus what happened to you. You know, like what happened to me that I act this way about other people.
Simple words like saying, instead of asking a person why they did something, asking them what they did and what their process around the decision they made was.
That's pretty big in the coaching world, right?
Yeah. Why at the beginning of a question tends to put people on the defense. And so finding ways to keep that flow and that conversation safe and open is important. And a lot of it's just in the way you word things. But I mean, and as far as I remember being in the corporate environment, I was in there for over 25 years. There were a lot of times you'd be in these environments where people would talk about you in your performance review, and they'd say stuff like, you need to try harder, or he's doing okay, but it could be a lot worse. And that really diminishes a person. So a shift in awareness can really help with the way we talk about ourselves and talk about others or talk with others. What are ways that we empower people? What are ways that we encourage people, see the best in them, you know, inspire people, those kinds of ways. And it's a lot, and most of the time it's with words.
And not just other people, but ourselves. How do we inspire ourselves? Like, you know, we talked about this the last episode too with blind spots and biases. It's like we don't have to look at those as bad and as wrong and we're messed up. We can look at them, like you said, as opportunities.
Just using the right words and about yourselves. Coaching has helped me as I've coached others. I've had more awareness about my own growth opportunities. For example, listening more effectively, limiting beliefs, what they are, how to notice those, or when you're listening to somebody, what are they saying, what are they not saying, can help you discover those opportunities for growth. And most of the time it comes through conversation, either self-talk or with somebody else. Not always, but most of the time.
Okay, so what are some examples of how we can isolate ourselves or other people when we're talking about our feelings? Like what are some phrases or things that we say or that we can pay attention to?
I did this, you know, or as opposed to you did that, you know.
Yeah. That's big in nonviolent communication of and a ton of other areas of just the I or me versus you, and even like you, them, you know, versus us and we.
Feels like it's when you say you, in its tone also, it's not just the word, it's how you say the word. But a lot of times that can be limiting or demeaning or accusatory or placing blame. And it's really just, it's simple, but it's not always easy. Because the simplicity of it is, okay, just change the way you talk. That's easy to say, but then you have to, when you're going out about trying to change habits that you might have developed for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, you've got to unlearn, and those neuron paths have to change. You know, so it takes time. So another important thing to remember on the fly as we're doing this is learning how to give yourself grace and be patient and see these awareness opportunities as places where you can grow. Well, another word there, you know, another area where that, you know, it's yeah, but, or no, but. Instead of saying no, but, or yeah, but, you can say yes, and, or just and.
Yeah.
That's just a simple shift in the way you say it.
Yeah, that came up with Darby and I in conversation, and it actually made me think of when I did an improv class. That's one of the principles is yes and. Is when you say yes and, it's an invitation. It's a door.
It's constructive.
It's a door that allows you to keep going and let your imagination keep flowing.
Whereas no, but halts that dialogue.
Yeah. It's sort of like, and this is a simple switch for me. It was, and I don't think I talked about this, but it is whenever I'm talking about how I feel, say I feel XYZ versus I am. Like, so oftentimes, I say I am sad, I am angry. And that is one of the most, someone once told me that the most important word ever is what you say after I am. Whatever you put after I am shapes your entire identity. So whenever I'm saying I am angry, I am then taking on and embodying that entire emotion, and I become that. Versus like I feel anger. It allows me to have more of a wider perspective, I guess, of what is going on in that situation. And so that was a simple, not easy, shift in my language of not letting my emotions completely rule me.
And another area along with that is learning how to not be intimidated when somebody does tell you how they feel. It's not right or wrong how they feel. It's just how they feel. And we grew up being told, well, don't be mad, or don't be sad, don't cry, or don't laugh, or whatever we were told. And I'm bunching a lifetime of memories together there, but it was how we felt. So you start pushing that stuff down. Maybe that goes back to the whole triggering. Some of that stuff comes back, and it creates these responses.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, trauma gets stored. It has to go somewhere. It has to go somewhere in our body. So if we're constantly shoving that, down, and our cells have these memories, it just takes one word, one perfect opportunity for that to just bust out and explode. And yeah, I never thought of it like that, actually. That's a good one, Dad.
Yeah, so what are some examples of empowering and demeaning language? Maybe go with the demeaning first. How about this? That's just the way she is.
Or that's just the way I am.
Yeah.
That's how I am. That's how I roll.
Yeah, you're just being too sensitive, or you'll never change. He's been like that since I've known him. I've known him 40 years. He's going to be like that till he dies. You put that on people.
Yeah.
Now, it's up to us to, one, not put it on people, and it's also up to us to not let that define us as well if somebody does that to us.
I remember, like, I still am, but it's just being so sensitive, and, someone says some stupid comment, some mean remark, and it just stays with you. I have a handful of things that I just remember kids saying that just were, and it maybe they weren't even trying to be mean. It just was off color. They were pointing out something on me that was different, and it just stuck.
What are some affirmative type of words and language that can be used?
Kate and I, for years now, she's really good at it, is writing out daily affirmations. I try to leave myself positive notes. I for years had the sign in my room that just said, "I love you, Hilary," from me.
Yeah.
But just, again, it's what you say after I am is really important.
Yes. The word of God through Hollywood, through our culture, who doesn't always look favorably upon God or religion. He invites us into a relationship with him that is affirming. It's not judgmental. It's not vindictive. He's not a hard taskmaster.
I think an important principle for me in healing and creating a landscape that is, like, I guess, productive is coming from a place of gratitude, like seeing my healing journey as an opportunity to experience life fully.
So then how does choosing gratitude how does the whole idea of choosing gratitude relate to the kind of language you use?
So I got this from my improv teacher as well. She's a very self-aware human and is also very conscious about the words that she uses. But she went through a period of time where just was super stressed financially. And, I have to pay this bill and I have to pay this and I have to do that. And she started catching herself saying, I have to, and instead would say, I get to. So I get to pay. I have the money and I get to pay this bill. Yes, I might not have as much as I'd like, but I get to have this car. I get to do, insert whatever. And that, again, I took that on and started adopting that. And I actually don't know when the last time I've thought about that, but it, again, when you see that you have, when you see how much you do have versus what you don't have, when you're on more of an affirmative, positive, optimistic language landscape versus looking at things from, less than, or I don't have this or whatever, it just, to me, it creates this more colorful landscape.
Yeah.
I don't know. Does that answer your question about gratitude and how that relates to language?
It's a shift in perspective. There's always a choice to make. Language and attitude tend to go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Which would be the point.
Well, and I think it's also important to say, too, that what we're talking about doesn't mean that you always have to be peachy and everything has to be rainbows and butterflies. Like, we're going to have bad attitudes. Some days I'm just off and I have to, run that course.
You had talked in one of our conversations, I don't think it was in an episode, but we were talking about some training that you've had, and you brought up the whole idea or the whole thought of emotional soundtracks. How can our language influence our mood and our perceptions?
Well,
based on what you know.
I guess it's the language we use around the emotions we feel. And we're going to have an emotion, and then we're going to be able to explain that emotion, maybe, with words. But our emotions, so in my training with heart math, our emotions create a soundtrack for all of us. I mean, it's just in the background. We each have a soundtrack. So if we're angry and we're pissed off at the world, we're going to move through the world and it's going to be colored in that way. Right. And so the words that we use, I feel like mirror that. So one visual we did in one of my trainings with heart math was they showed a 1-minute clip of a cityscape, just downtown buildings, and they had the first clip had just like classical music playing, and you watch that and it feels good and it's sweet and you feel peaceful. Well, you watch the same exact clip again, but they had different like screechy, horrible music to it, and it's again same visual, different audio, and our emotions. That's what it's like to be moving through as a human being, like moving through this life, is that our emotions color things. So I think where language relates to that is what words are we using to explain those emotions?
So in light of what you just said, which is we create these emotional soundtracks are created by our language that influence our mood and our perceptions. What are some ways of changing that soundtrack?
You know, one practice you and I both talk about, and we both do this, is we journal. And I think when we can, when we're just going off the cuff and mindlessly rattling off things, that's one thing. You can't really see it, you're just hearing it. And for me, I'm visual. So when I journal and I see the words that I'm using and I go back and reflect on some of the stuff that I've written about, it gives me a different perspective. So I think journaling is really good in that way. Is it is it helps me to be more mindful of, okay, what, look at this phrase and why did I say it like that? And again, coming at it from a place of curiosity.
Yeah, and another word you use a lot there is mindfulness. Well, then be mindful. When we say that a lot because it's in our culture. And mindfulness, we use it in business, we use it everywhere, at church, whatever, school. But what does that mean? What does mindfulness mean? It means pay attention. So when you're talking to someone, pay attention to the words you're using.
Yeah, I think that's, again, also having to be simple. I mean, you can't change your entire vocabulary overnight, and that's also, I think it's also important to say that changing your vocabulary isn't going to fix everything,
Changing your attitude would probably do more about that.
Which then if you change your attitude, then I think that you would start to see a shift in how you're speaking. What else? Is there anything else that you do that has helped just shifted your attitude or your language?
Yes, and I'll mention Darby by name here. When she gave me constructive criticism, I had a choice to make. It could have triggered me and I got offended. She hurt my feelings. She did this, blah, 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 whatever. Or I can go, you know what? I know that Darby cares about me. She's not trying to hurt me. I will listen to her feedback. And I will receive that feedback. I don't even have to agree with it. But I can listen to her because I know that she's got good intentions with that in this case.
Yeah, and she talks about that a lot, of you had the ability to pause. So I think that's a practice that we can all...
Don't jump to your own defense. Just give it a second.
Yeah. She said it's like metaphorically like sitting on your hands. Like you don't let yourself just run wild.
It takes practice.
You pause. So that I did want to say this quote because I think it's awesome and it fits here. But this is a quote by Viktor Frankl. And it says,
search for meaning.
Yeah. And it says, so between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom.
Yeah, and that honestly is a pretty good place to stop.
Yeah.
Because that just think about that. What does that mean to you? What is it? I have to think about it. What does it mean? How does it resonate with us? What are some of the words we've been using? How does this have, what kind of impact does this have on you?
Dad, can you sum it up in 3 bullet points for yourself?
We control much of what we respond and react to. It's about perspective and attitude. It doesn't necessarily change the signal coming in, but how we respond to it can change. We have control over that. And let's see. This is simple, but it's not easy, and it takes practice. I need to be more mindful of what I say and how I say it.
I think this conversation, I would say the same for me, is I want to just pay attention more to what I'm saying and how I'm saying it. Not just what I say about what other people, but what am I saying about myself? So that would be one. And I think it also, when I think of this whole concept of striking a chord and music, it makes me think of like a symphony and that we're in this together, A symphony is not just one instrument, it's all of us. And so as we're healing and as we're going down this journey, the importance of connection and reaching out to people and exploring life together,
Yes.
So I think that would be it. And
yeah, we're always want to hear what y'all think. We say it every time, but we really mean it every time. Is thanks for the feedback. the
Yeah.
encouragement. It's encouraging to realize that conversations are being had based on some of the stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah. And I would say too, let us know what you discover, or if you have any phrases or shifts in words that you use that have helped give you more clarity or more of a positive outlook on things. If you want to leave us any kind of comment about this, you can email us at powershiftcoaching@gmail.com, or you can leave a comment or send a message on our TikTok or Instagram page. And we love you. We hope y'all are having a good day, and we are so grateful for you.
Yes.